Anyway, it is my great pleasure now to launch this day by introducing one of the dearest people you'll ever meet in this food systems work, Danielle Nierenberg. She's a world-renowned researcher, speaker, and advocate on all issues relating to our food systems and agriculture. In 2013, Danielle co-founded Food Tank with Bernard Pollock, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on building a global community for safe, healthy, nourished eaters. Food Tank is a global convener, thought leadership organization, and unbiased creator of original research impacting the food system. Danielle has a master's degree in agriculture, food, and environment from Tufts University Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy, and she spent 2 years volunteering in the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic. Danielle is a recipient of the 2020 Julia Child Award as well. Welcome, Danny. And each moderator today will introduce their panels. Welcome, Danny.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you. I would like to invite our panelists to the stage. We have U.S. Congresswoman Chellie, Pingree, who represents Maine's 1st District. Please give her a round of applause. We have, thank you, Sarah Alexander, the Executive Director of the Maine Organic Farmers and Growers Association. I also want to thank Tracy and Edible Communities for putting together this event. The power of storytelling, as Tracy said, cannot be underestimated, so please give them a round of applause. Honored to come to these events for a while, and I always feel inspired and enriched and nourished when I leave. So I'm really, really excited about this morning's conversation about the Farm Bill. It's always an interesting discussion, right? Many people have said that the Farm Bill is the most important piece of legislation that no one knows about. And I guess that used to be the case, but I think that's changing, and maybe not always for the right reasons as things become more contentious in the House and the Senate. But we need more bipartisan support of food and agriculture, obviously, because that's the way it should be. That's the way it was. That's the way it should be. More than 3/4 of spending on the Farm Bill goes towards essential nutrition assistance programs, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance program called SNAP. But it also covers crop insurance, commodities, conservation, rural development, forestry, research, and many other things. And so during this session, we're going to talk about what is happening with the current Farm Bill, what we might see in legislation as Farm Bill negotiations continue, and how it reflects who we are as a country and who we want to be. So I'm so honored to sit down with these folks. Representative Pingree, I want to start with you, and I want to go back in time a little bit, because I think it makes sense to mention that you were an intern with the Maine Organic Farmers early in your career, which makes me want to see a photo of you then. I'm wondering if you could talk about that experience briefly and sort of how it influenced you and what you do now.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be with all of you. Thank you, Tracy, for the work you guys have done through the edible communities. I don't think anyone should underestimate the value that you've had overall in changing the dialogue and discussion around food and farming and farm to table and justice and just so many other important topics. You really provide us all with a valuable resource. And while we toil in public policy or run organizations, the work you do on the outside to help people understand these stories better is hugely important. So thank you. Thanks for coming to Maine. We're just thrilled to have you all here. And I'm thrilled to be here with these two brilliant women. Danielle, Danny, who I get to work with often on food issues, and Sarah, who's a real hero running Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. So what a cool morning for me. I'm just sorry I have to run off after this to another conference because it looks like it's going to be a great day. But yeah, so me. I came to Maine in the 1970s, and Maine had an in-migration then of people who were back to the landers. So anybody in the room who was here then remembers that we all had a copy of Helen and Scott Nearing's book, Living the Good Life Sustainably. off the earth, and we moved here because we thought we could live more simply in the wake of the Vietnam War and the turmoil that was going on in our country, and that was how I ended up here. Of course, I knew nothing about farming, even though I grew up my family is from Minnesota. I grew up in Minneapolis. My grandfather was a Norwegian immigrant who was a dairy farmer, so I should have known everything, but of course, as a kid, you don't want to know any of those things that your family cares about. So I tried my best. I wasn't that good at agriculture, and living off the land was a little trickier than I thought, and I was lucky enough to go to College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor and have as a teacher Elliot Coleman. So I sort of had the golden ticket. I really got to learn a lot. And we had an internship requirement there, and at that very time, I was able to do a farm apprenticeship on a farm in Camden, Maine. And I had been doing some work with MOFGA. It was the early days of Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, and through that, we determined that there should be a sort of an apprenticeship program. Like I was able to do that first summer that I had. So it was my first learning experience in milking a cow and growing vegetables and many of the things that became part of my own future, but it was also a solidifying of my relationship to MOFGA. After college, I moved back to a small island where I live now, and worked for MOFGA for a little while, but we decided to start an apprenticeship program, and Sarah can tell you more about it, but it's really been the foundation of helping new and young farmers get a start in Maine. They now have a more sophisticated program, the Journey Persons program, and it all made a difference. For me, I ended up, after that learning experience, starting my own small farm. First farm I had was 3 milking cows, 100 chickens, a couple of pigs, and 2 acres of vegetables. So I got a start in the 70s, not only being a back to the lander, but then actually figuring out like how do you make a business out of farming, how do you make a living on it. And since then, I have operated a farm or worked on a farm much of my time. I currently, the last farm I started was the Turner Farm on North Haven, and that's now an agro-tourism farm-to-table kind of business that 2 years ago we turned over the land to the American Farmland Trust. But we built the buildings and the infrastructure and ran it for many years, and I live on a quarter of the property, so I've best of both worlds. Farm-to-table meals and farm stand nearby, but I've had an opportunity to do that. But all of those things along the way taught me so much about organic farming. I've been a certified organic farmer all of the times that I've been farming. It taught me about the difficulty of making a living on a farm, the actual practice of farming, whether it's making sure that you value the soil, and the soil is the basis of plant health. For a while, we ran a chicken processing facility, so I know a lot about slaughterhouses, and I occasionally tell my colleagues in Congress, I'm very good at eviscerating a chicken. That's in Maine. And while I'm still a Democrat in a world that can occasionally be, break down into partisan things, I think it gives me at least I think it gives me a certain amount of credibility when I'm talking to people, because there's a source of pride in being an organic farmer and being a member of Congress. There's a source of pride in being able to say, what it's like to actually, run a tractor or weed a field for a whole day, or all the things that we all have to do. And last year when we were doing a listening tour for the Agriculture Committee, I brought many of my colleagues here to Maine. We did a listening session in Maine with a committee, Republican and Democrat, and I brought them out to the island and gave them a chance to actually see what the operation looks like that I started. We also have winter greenhouses, so we grow year-round. A lot of the things that I often talk about, I had them see, and we have aquaculture there, so they got to meet a scallop grower, a kelp grower, and visit an oyster farm. So firsthand, one of the things that often doesn't get enough attention in the Agriculture Committee is our relationship to seafood and aquaculture, and so we got a chance to see that. So I'd say, this is my life. That's it. It's my life. And so everything about it has led up to this opportunity that I have today to work on public policies, to write farm bills. And I'm just incredibly blessed to do that. I serve on the Agriculture Committee, so we're working, as you know, on the 2023 Farm Bill. That was last year. But we're still working on it. I've worked on other farm bills. I've been in Congress for 16 years. I served in the state legislature before that, doing farm policy. So I've just had amazing opportunities along the way. I also serve on the Agriculture Appropriations Committee. So funding the things that we really care about is also in my domain. So I get the best job ever. And you're in my district, Maine. I represent half of Maine.
Thank you so much, Chellie. I think Chellie Pingree proves that more farmers should become policymakers.
Please.
Sarah, I want to give you a chance to talk about Maine Organic Farmers and Growers Association and some of the things that Chellie mentioned, including helping young farmers and beginning farmers sort of take off.
Yeah, so the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association is actually the oldest and largest statewide organic advocacy group in the country. We were founded in 1971 by a group of folks who were coming back to the land and interested in really showing that there was an alternative way forward. You know, I think about what was happening in the 60s in terms of our social movements, but also so much had changed in the previous 2 decades in terms of our agricultural and our food systems. And I think coming to Maine, to come back to the land, to grow food, to be self-sufficient, to work in community, to share knowledge and information with each other was really meant to create a different kind of food system that was really in reaction to what had really become an industrialized food system with, you know, very low quality industrial food that most people had access to. And so in the early 70s, people were not only growing their own food, but were starting to also look, even in those early days of our organization, at policy and what was impacting local food, you know, what were things that were going into our food system. This kind of happened at the same time as the environmental movement was really taking off in the early 70s. And so our organization over the last 50 years has really been founded on peer-to-peer education and empowering people to feed their communities and working through that to support farmers and then advocate for an organic future. And I think, you know, I'm a relative newcomer to Maine. I've been here for about 10 years. I grew up in Ohio, very, very close to the land. My family did a lot of hunting and fishing and foraging when I was growing up. My generations and my family are very close, so I spent a lot of time with my great-grandmothers. They were some primary caretakers for me, and so my great-grandmothers, who became parents in the Great Depression, spent a lot of time growing their gardens, you know, tending their apple trees and their grapevines in town, in the city. This wasn't out in the country, but in a rural, you know, small community in Ohio. And so at the time, I took it for granted, but I therefore spent a lot of time canning and cleaning, you know, beans and cucumbers and grapes and, you know, all of those sorts of things. And so I think many of us come to this work with a personal connection to food and a personal relationship, you know, even today. And I think this is some of the work that you all get to highlight are those personal connections and inspiration that people take from that really meaningful connection to food. You know, food is a human right. We all need food, and good food should be a human right. People shouldn't be worried about whether or not their food is going to make them sick or how it's been produced or if they have enough of it. And so coming to Maine, I think one of the great things that I've learned, and I've been in this role as executive director, locally we call our organization MOFGA, so you might hear that referred to, that we really in Maine, for better or worse, we're at the end of the line. We're kind of like isolated. And so what I've seen from my experience across the country is that here in Maine, we really have done things differently, both out of necessity, because we are the last of the line, and so people had a need to be a little more collaborative with each other and interconnected and make sure that community needs were met, and because we are a state that is 90% forested. And so that even though we have a very robust agricultural system here in Maine, our farms look different than they look in the Midwest where I grew up in Ohio. I grew up surrounded by thousands and thousands of acres of corn and soybean commodity production, and the agricultural landscape here in Maine looks really different. And so I think that has resulted in some really interesting advocacies, both showing what's possible and what we can do in local food systems in Maine, and then using Maine hopefully as a model for what can happen in other parts of the country.
Fantastic, thank you. And even though we're here in Maine, I want to acknowledge that everyone on this panel is originally from the Midwest. So I think that deserves a round of applause. I'm from Missouri. And we'll talk more about forests later, so I'm really glad you brought that up. And I do want to dig into the Farm Bill now, because I think a lot of folks may not realize that the Farm Bill, even though it's this huge federal piece of legislation, has a real impact on local food systems. And I'm hoping you can both sort of talk about what the impact of previous farm bills has been here in Maine and for farmers, and for farmers who are trying to grow more sustainable, grow in more sustainable, regenerative, organic ways. Do you want to go first, Chellie?
Sure. Well, I mean, just to dip my toe in, and I don't want to, I won't talk for more than a couple minutes right now, so we can just keep going back and forth. But it is important to remember that the Farm Bill has 12 titles, and each one covers a section of rural life, although it often is urban life as well. But we often say it's the most important bill about rural life, because it is everything from the things that you think about. Number one title is the commodities. So those are the commodity crops. That's the things we occasionally dispute about, you know, how much of a subsidy wheat or corn or soybeans, rice, peanuts, dairy and sugar will get. And that's, you know, that's sort of where people often, you know, think the Farm Bill is. It's just giving money to big farmers, and that's something that we fight about. But it has all of our conservation titles, which is what we're currently using at the federal level to promote climate-smart agriculture, to support the very things that we care about farmers doing the most, and certainly everything that fits into organic farming. It has our trade title. Nutrition, as you heard about, is over 80% of the Farm Bill. Credit, which often extends to farmers, but it also, fishermen and farmers, extends to some other things too. Rural development, and you don't always think about it, but rural development often builds the hospital or the nursing facility in your town, or it pays for the sewer system or the water system. And so a lot of things that actually change things in small cities and rural communities. All of the research that we do on the future, forestry, energy, a lot of renewable energy, REAP projects are in there now, and I have a small grocery store in my community. There's applying for a REAP grant to put solar panels on the roof. So it's way more than you think. Horticulture, crop insurance, and a lot of miscellaneous stuff. But it's just, it extends to all of our lives. It's very hard to make it understandable to people because it covers so many different things. But I think it's always good to make a Farm Bill connection when you can. I think it's always good to, help people understand that it impacts your life. And it is a political battle, as I said. And again, I don't want to take too much time on this, but we're on the 2023 Farm Bill. Almost every Farm Bill takes at least an extra year. Almost every Farm Bill breaks down in Congress over the nutrition title. WIC, SNAP benefits, food boxes, a whole variety of things get in there, and we fight about it all the time. It's a disgrace that we fight about it because we're the richest country in the world and no one should go hungry, and why in the world do we fight about making sure that hungry people get food? But welcome to my world. We also this year have some big fights around the conservation title and climate change. Again, it's not always partisan, and it's actually, there are a lot of Republicans who believe in climate change and want to do everything we can. There are millions of farmers who want the assistance to do everything they can about climate change and reduce their impact and use the soil to sequester more carbon. So it's widely supported by farmers and rural communities. But when you get to Congress, sometimes we have to wash our mouth out with soap if we say climate change. So we are fighting about that. And those, there are three differences right now in this Farm Bill that are keeping us from passing it right now, and we'll probably carry it into maybe the end of the year, maybe next year. But anyway, it is an important document for people who care about making sure their neighbors get fed and that we reduce the climate change impact in this country. So it's a good thing for everybody to know about. And when it comes to elections and voting, how someone is going to vote on the Farm Bill or how they stand on these kind of issues does say a lot about who they are and who they represent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Sarah, Chellie mentioned that, the Farm Bill extends to all of our lives. Can you drill in on how it affects folks in Maine?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in addition to, so I wrote down the last Farm Bill was $428 billion, which that's just really hard to wrap our head around in general. But over 76% of that does just go to the nutrition title, which is SNAP and WIC and all those things that Chellie was just talking about. And so then as we drill down into the rest of it, I would say it gets smaller and smaller on the farm side down to some of the programs that we're implementing here in Maine. So I think there are well, it's less than 1% of the Farm Bill, but it's still $4.2 billion that go into things like local food programs, farmers market promotion, helping farms through research, seeds and breeds for locally adapted, seeds and animals that are appropriate for regional agricultural production. Things like how we're helping with, and I'm looking at Nancy here with the Department of Agriculture here in Maine. We are a partner with the Specialty Crop Block Grant. So one of all of the specialty crop work, and specialty crops is a fancy name for fruits and vegetables, basically. But the things that aren't the corn and soy and the large commodities, almost everything else that we actually eat, fruits and vegetables and other food, are considered specialty crops. And Maine is one of the largest, those are our largest products here in terms of land-based agriculture. It is, potatoes and wild blueberries and diversified fruit and vegetable production that we see on our farms here in Maine. We have 7,000 farms in Maine. Last year, the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association worked with over 1,100 farms to provide direct technical assistance for support on everything from starting their farm. So we have beginning farmer programs, even before the apprenticeship program, right? Folks are interested. We connect them up with farms here locally. We have over 540 of those farms here in Maine that are certified organic under the National Organic Program. So something like being certified organic means that that farm is going above and beyond to both meet the production standards and do the record keeping and do what's necessary. But that's a voluntary program, and the farmer has to pay for that certification. So one very tangible example of how the Farm Bill and that small slice of programs can support local farmers is that local farmers can get reimbursed for a portion of their certification fees, and we administer that. What the Climate Smart Commodities program, which will be a part of the conservation title moving forward, that came out of the some other federal legislation. The Inflation Reduction Act is a huge investment in climate and what we're doing. Well, organic farming is climate smart farming, and we have national programs, right, that are helping people both adopt more practices that are organic practices, things like cover cropping, crop rotation, pollinator zones, buffer zones, agroforestry, all of these things that many of our farms here in Maine have been doing and modeling for many, many years. Now we see through something like the Farm Bill the ability to expand those programs and get them onto more farms, and actually get those tax dollars. I mean, really, this is ultimately about what investments are we as a nation making into our food system? What kind of food system do we want to have? And about the same time that MOFGA was being formed, we had federal policymakers really pushing for a different kind of agriculture and telling farmers that they needed to get big or get out. And we've seen extreme consolidation in the food system over the last 50 years at the same time that our organization has been working to really build up small and medium-sized farmers and provide them with the technical support, the resources, and the tools that they can use to have a thriving local food system that is resilient and that can feed our communities.
Awesome. That deserves a round of applause just for all the amazing work that MOFGA is doing. So, Chellie, you mentioned that the Farm Bill was due to expire in September of 2023. Congress extended it for an additional year. It will be extended again, I imagine. Where is the legislation now, and where do you want it to be?
So we have an extension, I think, until the end of September, but most of the programs don't actually really expire till the end of December. So we have till the end of the year, basically. Congress is in session for 2 more weeks, and then we break till after the election is over. So it doesn't look like in the next 2 weeks that we're actually going to come to a resolution, but given the volatility of an election, everything gets determined on November 5th, as you know. And so the Republicans and Democrats are very close in our margins in the House and in the Senate. And so depending on who takes over, it will change the climate of of how we negotiate and what leverage we have to negotiate. Right now, the Republicans in the House have written a fairly conservative farm bill, although we have a lot that we agree on. G.T. Thompson, who's from Pennsylvania, has actually been a very good chair to work with under somewhat difficult situation, and I don't have to go to all the politics of the House, but as you know, there's a somewhat strident Freedom Caucus that sort of keeps their side from really passing almost any legislation, and the Farm Bill is one of those pieces, and they are particularly opposed to the nutrition programs. So right now, they don't, as we say, they don't have the votes on their side, and we certainly wouldn't vote for their version of the bill. Debbie Stabenow from Michigan is in her last term as a United States Senator, has written a beautiful farm bill in the Senate, and she has done a great job of trying to bring people together around that, but again, is sort of constrained by what we can do in the House. So that's way more politics probably than you wanted to know, but if the Democrats take control of the House, then the Republican side will say, like, oh, let's hurry up and get this bill done because we want to get whatever we possibly can while we're still in control. And so let's negotiate with the Democrats on these things that we put out. One of them is called the Thrifty Food Plan. We're opposed to them using it. The Thrifty Food Plan is a way to evaluate what goes into the SNAP benefits. And so they don't want that to be revised. We want it to continue to be revised and make sure people can actually get enough money to pay for the food they need. So they might say, okay, so we'll drop that. That's done. Why are we arguing on that? We're never going to get passed anyway. So if we could come to a resolution, I think it behooves all of us to get the Farm Bill done. Like I said, this is the 2023 Farm Bill. If we could just get it done this year, we'll start work on the 2028 Farm Bill in 2025. If I'm lucky enough to be there, we'll already be working on that, and to have to carry it over is a problem. I mean, there are those people who say, well, what if the Democrats take control of the House, the Senate, and the White House? I mean, that's a long shot, but then should you just back up and rewrite the whole thing? It's complicated, and it's more bipartisan than you think already, so we just have some sticking points. The other thing is, again, one last little inside nerdy thing, but the Inflation Reduction Act was the most significant contribution that we've ever made to conservation programs, increasing the dollars there. It's the most significant dollar spending we've ever done related to climate change priorities and trying to reverse the course of this disastrous path we're on right now. We can take the extra money that went into the IRA, try to incorporate it into the mandatory funding of the Farm Bill, and basically beef up these conservation programs. And just to give you an idea, I mean, farmers in Maine benefit from this, farmers all over the country do. These are things like practices of, helping farmers have the resources to do cover crops or less tilling in their agriculture. REAP programs, like I said, that offer a renewable energy, on-farm renewable energy, which can reduce the cost of farmers. So there's all kinds of things. They're wildly supported. Usually we have enough money for about half of them if we're lucky, so to increase the amount of money would be good. If we get the Farm Bill passed this year, we have more money available to put into that. So that was a non-definitive answer and a lot of inside wonky talk, but elections change everything. Elections change everything. So we are really kind of in a holding pattern right now. We had lots of groups who have an interest in the commodity title come to visit us this week in Washington to try to get us to move quickly. Every commodity group has a reason to want more money. It's a tough time to be a farmer, but then we also have to balance that with how much can government subsidize cotton, corn, and peanuts.
Thank you, Chellie. And it's good to hear that the Farm Bill is more bipartisan than we think already. But I have heard a lot of people say, and this is for both of you, that no Farm Bill right now is better than what is already in place. And so, Sarah, I'm hoping you can comment on that first. Should we wait? Chellee's suggesting that we shouldn't, but what are your thoughts on sort of waiting for a better Farm Bill later on?
Well, that's complex because which Farm Bill are we talking about, right? Like there are two different versions of the Farm Bill right now because of how the process works. The House has their version, the Senate has their version. And so I think we're always hoping for incremental improvement. Everything about organic agriculture and the foundation of organic agriculture is about incremental and continuous improvement. And so, I think we want to see that in our policies that are supporting our farmers as well. And so while I think of that, that other little percentage of the Farm Bill that is currently in place is supporting so many wonderful programs that we're utilizing all across this country, that small and medium-sized local producers are utilizing to do the work that they want to do to feed their communities really well. And so maintaining that is really important, and I think there are, we hope opportunities in the next Farm Bill to see those incremental improvements, but I think we certainly would not advocate for moving a bill forward, nor would many people, advocate for moving a bill forward that is going to eliminate some of those critical programs that are already being utilized by farmers. We do still want to see progress. We want to see the Farm Bill passed so we can make those incremental improvements and add new opportunities as well. And so one of the things here, and I don't know if this is when we want to get into it, but one of the new things that we're advocating, and Representative Pingree and Senator Collins are the co-sponsors of this effort, is to include a new safety net in the Farm Bill for farmers who are impacted with PFAS contamination or forever chemical contamination. And we have, again, this is an area where Maine has been leading. We've created a model here for what the safety net can look like, but we need a federal response. And so passing a new Farm Bill will create an opportunity to include something like the Relief for Farmers Hit with PFAS Act so that we can continue to improve in supporting how we're really creating a safety net for farmers who are impacted through no fault of their own with PFAS contamination.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Can we dig a little bit more into how PFAS, these forever chemicals, really affect farmers and communities?
Go ahead. I can add. You go first and I'll add.
Yeah, so, I've worked in agriculture for over 20 years. I've worked in states all across the country. I've worked at the federal level on policy, and PFAS was never something that was on my radar until just the last few years, and that's because forever chemicals are not meant to be used in agriculture. It's not like, oh, here's something that we're intentionally adding in order to, create a better product. PFAS contamination, so PFAS are a class of forever chemicals that really don't break down in the environment. They're things that are commonly used to make things heat resistant, grease resistant, water resistant. So think about your Gore-Tex jacket or your boots or your Teflon pan, that somebody might be cooking in. Tons of products that we are exposed to every day have these chemicals in them. And so they end up in our environment both through the manufacturing process of manufacturing these products and the waste streams that come out of that, but also from just the day-to-day use of things that we're using. The chemicals are shedding off of our clothes or personal care products or our Teflon pan. And so they end up in the wastewater stream from our household waste as well. And so a few years ago in Maine, through random testing, a dairy farm was found to have PFAS contamination on their farm, in their well water and in their soil. And through investigation, it came to be found that happened through the spreading of biosolids, which are wastewater, sewage sludge that gets applied to land. This practice happens all across the country. Every state in the country, 22 million acres across the country have been spread with biosolids. And because of these waste streams, most of those biosolids contain PFAS chemicals. Some of those biosolids contain very high levels of PFAS chemicals. And so when they're land applied, they can end up in whatever's being produced on that land. They move throughout the ecosystem. They end up in our drinking water, our groundwater, our surface waters, our wildlife. So it's a very complex issue. However, here in Maine, through the leadership of our farmers, our courageous storytelling of our farmers who have been impacted, through incredible collaboration at the state level with our state agencies, Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, Department of Environmental Protection, and then groups like MAFGA and Maine Farmland Trust and other ag service provider groups that have stepped up. We have started to investigate what is the risk and what are the levels of contamination that may exist on farms here in Maine, and then how do we address that? Our goal is to have safe and healthy food for all of us and ensure that farmers can stay in business. Our programs, historically are about getting more people farming, keeping farmers on the land, making sure that they have viable businesses and can be successful. And so we don't want to see contamination that has happened through no fault a farmer's own, be the end of that business. So what we've done here in Maine is we have created opportunities for direct assistance for farmers who find contamination on their land, and provide MAFCA, along with Maine Farmland Trust, set up an emergency relief fund to provide direct income support to those farms to help them transition their production. And then that ultimately was created as state legislation that the state passed a $60 million fund to support those farmers and help them get through to the other side. The good news is that it works. When we support our farmers, when we have a safety net in place, we can get farmers to the other side of this crisis, this issue. We've had around 60 farms that have found some level of contamination in Maine, and thankfully, most of those are still in business. We've had about 5 farms that have gone out of business because of this. And so we know this is not a Maine-specific issue because I attribute it to we're a small state, which really feels like a big town, a big community. Everybody knows each other. We have incredible opportunities and ways to work together, to be really collaborative. And so we've done that to address this issue, but we know this is an issue everywhere and it needs to be addressed at the federal level. Right now, farmers in Texas have recently found contamination and have gone out of business. In every other state where contamination has been found, and when you look for contamination, you will find it, but when it's been found, those farmers have gone out of business. And so in the Farm Bill, we have an opportunity to pass this Relief for Farmers Hit with PFAS Act that would create the same safety net that we have here in Maine to make that accessible to every state in the country so that no farmer goes out of business because of this contamination.
Thank you, Sarah. Forever chemicals are really a crisis, and we need to address it, so I'm glad you used that word. Representative Pingree, do you want to comment on what's happening with the legislation?
Sure, and just to say, Sarah has done a wonderful job. Maine has done a wonderful job. The Department of Agriculture, the Maine legislature, I mean, passing $60 million is phenomenal, and I don't think we should underestimate that. And for all of you who come from states around the country, it's worth going back to just see, like, where does this stand in your state? Because one of the challenges is that most commissioners of agriculture, when they hear 1 or 2 stories about contamination on a farm, they're like, do I really want to crack this open? The level of expense, the complication, and sometimes the perception of your state. You know, it was a very brave thing for Maine to just get out there and admit it, because you don't want your state identified as the one like, well, I'm not drinking the milk from Maine because it probably has PFAS in it. And how quickly that can happen in the food or seafood industry is very concerning to people. And so I think in states around the country, and when I talk to my colleagues about it, there's still a lot of worry about we're not sure we want to move forward. And in a weird way, in the federal level, we've met a little bit of that resistance, certainly in the beginning. But we've had Secretary Vilsack here really multiple times since this story broke in Maine, and one time specifically just to meet with farmers impacted by PFAS. And I think it's hard for the federal secretary, without a lot of congressional backing, to say, okay, how do we jump in? Because if you can think about $60 million in a state with 7,000 farmers and 1.3 million people, you know, is a pretty significant contribution to make to solving the problem, and not enough. Try to picture what the federal response is going to have to be. We're going to do this one day or another, and moving forward with this in the Farm Bill would be really helpful. I serve on agricultural appropriations too, and also the Appropriations Committee that oversees the EPA, and we're lucky when we can get a $5 million chunk put into our appropriations bill to move forward. And there's so much we have to do. We have to study how the impact is in different fruits and vegetables, so we know like how much contamination is a problem for different foods or meat or dairy. We have to think about mitigation. What do you do in soil? We know a lot about what to do in a water system. And then you have to think about, you know, are we stopping the use of this in every place we have to be? So we could spend the whole panel on PFAS, but getting this into this Farm Bill would be very helpful. My goal will be to continue to get a lot more money. I've seen a lot of action at the USDA more recently, so I know that they are stepping up and trying to think about what to do. Same with the EPA, and we've had them here also to talk about this issue. So a federal response is really important, and some of it we need some pressure from more states. And because states are reluctant to be the next one that jumps on the bandwagon, there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing going there. But I think it's going to keep moving no matter what, and it's a really important thing, and the funding behind it is going to be the most critically important thing. But yay Maine for setting a really good example of how to deal with a crisis like this and support the farmers through it. It's an amazing statistic that you've only lost 5 farmers through this, that we have only lost 5 farmers through this process. And these are heartbreaking stories. When you're an organic farmer who's worked the land for 10 years, done everything by the certified standards, and then you find out not only is your land contaminated, but you and your children are contaminated, and you can't drink the water in your own property. I mean, these are really heartbreaking stories. And it was all done with the best of intentions. How do we get rid of sewage sludge? Well, we'll spread it on land. It's got, nitrogen. It's got a lot of good things that, are benefiting the soil, and, maybe a less expensive way to fertilize your soil. And this goes back to the 70s and the 80s. So, it wasn't usually the current farmer that's even complicit in what happened to their land.
Yeah, all of those unintended consequences. But yay, Maine, for taking lead on this issue. And I think when we talk about the power of storytelling, this is a particular issue where if we're telling these stories of these farmers and these communities who are affected by forever chemicals, we can make a big difference. Representative Pingree, because your time is limited here, I want you to talk a little bit about how we sort of got to know each other around the issue of food loss and food waste. You have been this warrior against food loss, a joyous one, against food loss and food waste. But, we've seen this year that the Biden-Harris administration released the national strategy for reducing food loss and waste and recycling organics. So do you think we're getting to a point where it's beyond, we've created awareness that we're actually making progress in legislation and what the Biden-Harris administration has released? Where are we?
Yeah, thanks. And I think we have tried to use the Farm Bill as a vehicle to talk about food waste and to have more of a federal response. I'm sure everyone in this room understands the magnitude of this problem. About a third of the food is wasted in this country. That means it doesn't go to the hungry people we were talking about only minutes ago who don't get the sufficient nutrition that they need and want. It also means that it has a huge, that we're not just wasting the food, we're wasting the water, the farmer's time, the transportation of this food. All of those compound the environmental impact. And most food waste ends up in a landfill, turns into methane gas, and so once again, contributes to the climate change crisis. I see estimates of, it would be the 3rd largest country if it was, food waste would be if it was, as looking at it as an emitter. Not sure that's exactly accurate, but it is really a significant problem. And I can tell you, I was at, a gathering like this maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and some person who'd done a lot of work in this was on a panel, and I thought, oh, I guess I'll go. I mean, food waste, whatever. Your grandmother told you not to waste food. We've got a lot bigger problems to deal with. And then when they laid out the magnitude of the problem, and I realized that there were entities working on this, I was like, why aren't my colleagues and I talking about it and talk about a bipartisan issue? I mean, everyone's grandmother told them not to waste food. So people don't like the idea of wasting food, but the complexity of it, what gets wasted on the farm, what gets wasted in transportation and storage, what about restaurants, what about homes, how do we all contribute to the problem, what about grocery stores, and then what are the solutions, how do we go about doing it? So I think this administration has really taken this, in hand, and they did release the first report, which we've been waiting for a long time. There's a joint task force between the USDA and the EPA because this is a significant waste issue. It's a huge cost to many of our communities. The amount of food waste that goes into a landfill just fills your landfill up that much faster, and then you've got that significant cost. So I think we're making a lot of progress. We have things that we're trying to include in this Farm Bill. And again, I'm always trying to get more money through the appropriations bill so that the programs are funded, the assistance to communities, and then some really basic things. Like once you think about solving the problem, does your community have a way at their landfill to support either putting in a biodigester or a composting operation? That's a whole nother, expense that comes through a different, funding stream. But you can't say to a community, try to reduce your food waste or have a curbside pickup for food waste. But, oh yeah, good luck finding a way to fund all that and get it all done. It's very widely supported by people when they hear about it. We have programs to educate kids in schools, and of course, as you know, if a school adopts a food waste program and the kids either have a share table where they return the food that they're not going to eat, or they're participating in a composting program, they go right home and tell their parents. As we all know, we've been yelled at by our children before, why aren't you recycling this stuff, and why don't you do something, and what about climate change? That's my future. So, I mean, there's a lot of really good ways to do it, and it is one of those horrific issues that's, come by the way we have the way we designed our food systems and our supply chains, and it could be reflected very differently if we did more locally, and, farms themselves were self-contained units that handled all their own food waste. There's a lot we could be doing, and I'm excited that we've gotten a lot of support for it. The one thing that we're really pushing this year, just aside, but everybody loves this bill, is the Food Date Labeling Act, because everybody goes into their pantry, and you pick up the box of crackers and you say, oh my gosh, it's expired, we have to throw away, and somebody else says, what do you mean, it's just, a month beyond the date, it's probably perfectly good. And all of that labeling, except for infant formula, is actually decided by the manufacturer. It's arbitrary and completely confusing to people, so we just are trying to have a system where it's really clear to you that something would be best to eat by a certain date, and don't eat after a certain date. So that's something I think we can eventually get past, but welcome to Washington. It's a complicated bureaucracy of who regulates it, and is it mandatory or voluntary, and all those other things. But yeah, thank you for all the work you've put into really raising the profile of this issue. And I see there's a cover story in Edible Maine, reducing waste. So thank you, Edible Maine.
That's great. Thank you. Yes. Sarah, just to stay on this issue briefly, you have said that putting food waste in landfills is heartbreaking for organic growers who are trying to build soils. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why it's we're wasting not just the food, but we're wasting a valuable resource?
Absolutely. I mean, it is related to the core foundational principles of organic, which is building soil health and building organic matter and returning, every time you're growing something, you are taking nutrients and other things out of the soil, and it's about replenishing and return and making it even better. And so, most of the farms that we work with do have, their own on-farm composting programs, but looking at, community scale composting programs and making sure that we are returning, we're being responsible in returning those nutrients to the soil in a way that is healthy for the soil and better for our communities. I mean, the landfill issue, right, adds additionally to climate change through the methane gas that's released as that food is decomposing in the landfill. So it's a complex issue, but if we can look at local solutions, local opportunities. I think we've got a lot of great examples here in Maine of those sorts of compost and reuse and recycling of nutrients, right? That we're thinking about the system holistically and how it's all connected.
Absolutely. We can turn it from a heartbreaking story into one where we're really using these valuable resources. Because we are running out of time and I had pages and pages more of questions, I want to give you both a chance to, you're talking to an audience of storytellers, right? What is your call to action as we go into this election cycle, and what's beyond? What is your call to action to these storytellers? And Sarah, maybe you go first.
Sure. Well, I think the framing of this panel was like, what nobody knows about the Farm Bill, right? Like, how does this impact our daily lives? And so I think from a storytelling and an education perspective and an empowerment, the Farm Bill does impact each of our daily lives in many, many ways. And so really working to empower people to participate in the process. I think there's, the society right now feels very divisive in some ways, and that really comes down to a lot of people feeling disillusioned about their own power and their ability to make change or impact change. And so I think we can empower people to participate in that process. I mean, we have our elected officials who we elect. Elections do matter. We have our elected officials who are there to represent the interests and the solutions that we want to see in our community. We all have to participate. We all have to be invested. Democracy is not a spectator sport, right? Mm-hmm. So I think storytelling to empower people to really get engaged and break it down in a way that shows what kind of impact this can have for our local communities.
Thank you, Sarah. I like this idea of a citizen eater, somebody who votes with their food values. And food is such an important empowerment tool, as you mentioned, so thank you for that. Chellie, you get the final word on this call to action to this wonderful audience.
Well, thank you. Really, it is a privilege to be with all of you. I know there's nothing easy about the publishing business for those of you who publish magazines, but what a great platform to have about this incredibly important topic. You know, everyone eats, everyone needs to be able to access food, and everyone loves to think about the kinds of topics that you're talking about. And I guess I would just suggest, without feeling that you're dipping into politics in a partisan or divisive way, there are so many pieces of legislation that impact the very stories that you're writing. And many of them are bipartisan, many of them may be supported by somebody in your home state. And I think anytime you can engage that as part of the writing that you're doing, what I find is that everybody, when I give a talk or anything related to the Farm Bill or food or farm to table or organic farming, all these things, everybody's like, yeah, I want to do more to help improve our food system and I want to work on this. What should I do? And it's sort of hard to just say like, okay, well, here's the list, and you know, make these calls tomorrow when it comes to this. But if you're thinking about it every time you write a story and the range of topics, you know, we have bills and funding items that help to support more school gardens or education in school, so kids' nutrition education is better, or that they can work on a composting system. Kids love gardens in their schools. They love to be able to say, I grew that carrot, or I'm going to eat that kale, and they often go home and tell their parents about it. There's so much to be said about meal programs and the funding programs and sort of making that more normal to people. And we were working really hard to get more healthy fruits and vegetables in those programs and how that works. Like many farmers markets take up the double bucks programs that allow you to get double the amount of your SNAP benefits if you're buying healthy fruits and vegetables. You know, incorporate that into a story when you're talking about the local farmers market and how people can benefit from it. Farm labor, huge issue for us, and we have labor modernization bills, but there's never enough workers to be on farms, or apprenticeship programs and how more young people, you know, could make it part of their life. Beginning farmers and ranchers, how we support more new people getting into farming, and then all the farm programs that help small to medium-sized farmers to do those things on their farm that they couldn't afford otherwise without some kind of subsidy. Obviously, food waste. I mean, I could go on for hours about, you know, there's a bill for that, there's a bill for that. And if you think about that when you're writing a story, like, wow, is there something I could throw in here? Or is there something your state legislature is doing? Often parallel legislation. Is there somebody that you might want to interview or just feature in that story, even if it's just a little paragraph at the end that says action step? You know, here, look at this bill or sign on to this legislation. And especially in this world, these are not like divisive, big picture things. They're usually something that everybody would say, like, yeah, I want to get more farmers and ranchers, and we need more young people farming and ranching. How do I support that? So I really think you can be an amazing connector to that and do it in such a comfortable, pleasant way. You've just written the, you just, you know, picked up your magazine, you've read a beautiful story, and it's got great pictures, and then at the end it says, oh, maybe you should, you know, see that this thing is going on in the state legislature. The other thing that a lot of cities, towns, you know, states are doing are regional eating plans, you know, and featuring those at some point, or again, featuring them sometimes and say, hey, did you know the city council in our community is going to actually have a meeting about what do we do to encourage more local purchase of food? Because changing that and changing the way the food system works is something that can be done town by town, state by state. And a lot of times people just don't know, you know, how do I get involved? Where do I access that? So you guys have an amazing platform, credible vehicle on a topic that everybody wants to be engaged in, but really everybody also wants to know, what can I do? And you've got the best way to go about doing that, you know, issue by issue. So thank you very much.
Woo. Thank you to our panel. You were both wonderful. So nice to see you both. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
you.